The wind had a way of owning the Wyoming plains that November. It swept without mercy, carrying dust, shards of ice, and the faint groan of cedar fences straining against the season's first weight of snow. Ezra Callahan stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, coat collar turned high, watching the last stagecoach of the week lumber down the track. He had sent word to town 3 weeks past, asked for a cook willing to work the winter, someone with steady hands and no fear of isolation. He had expected a broad-shouldered woman, gray of hair, with skill enough to feed a cattleman and keep his hearth lit. But the figure that stepped down from the coach was nothing he had asked for. She was young, far too young to be carrying the grief that clung to her like shadow. Her shawl, faded and patched at the edges, clutched tightly around her shoulders, did little to hide the roundness of her belly. The driver set down a single satchel beside her, muttering a farewell before urging the horses back toward town. In a breath, the stage was gone, wheels grinding into the snow-hardened mud, leaving only silence and the woman at the gate. Ezra's jaw tightened. He muttered to himself, "Lord above, this ain't what I asked for." The woman lifted her chin, though her eyes betrayed no spark, only weariness. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked, her voice carrying softly over the wind. He answered with a curt nod. "You're here for the cooking?" "Yes, sir. My name is Clara Whitcomb." The name struck no memory. He searched her face, not for recognition, but for explanation. Why a woman heavy with child, cheeks hollow with hunger, had come all this way. She did not flinch under his gaze, though her hands twisted the edge of her shawl. Ezra drew a slow breath, rubbing at the scar that creased from temple to jaw, a reminder of fights long behind him but never forgotten. "You traveled alone?" She nodded once. "The driver said he'd wait only till here." Ezra looked past her, down the road swallowed by the horizon. He could send her back, wave down the coach before it was too far gone. The thought coiled tight in him. A woman like this was nothing but trouble, fragile, needing. And yet he knew the cold, knew it well enough to see what it would do to her before the week was out. With a grunt, he turned on his heel. "Come on, then." She followed without a word, boots crunching the frost-stiff ground. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and wood smoke. The hearth was stone-cold, the kettle blackened from years of use, and the rocking chair by the fire wore a coat of neglect. She paused in the threshold, her eyes sweeping over the room not with judgment but with the silence of someone cataloging a place she had not chosen, but must endure. Ezra hung his hat by the door and lit a match against the mantel, coaxing a flame into the lantern. Shadows rose against the log walls, stretching long and thin. "That stove's yours now," he said, nodding toward the iron beast that took up one corner of the kitchen. "Wood piles out back. Don't expect fine larder, beans, salt pork, and coffee. More when spring comes." Clara set her satchel down on the worn table. It sagged beneath her weight as she eased herself onto the bench. She folded her hands, fingers trembling just enough for Ezra to notice, though she fought to keep them still. He busied himself with the lantern, though there was nothing left to tend. The silence between them swelled until the crack of the wind outside pressed against the windows. Finally he spoke, voice flat. "Didn't expect—" He cleared his throat. "Didn't expect you." Her gaze flicked to him, brief, sharp, then gone. "I understand." There was no defense in her tone, no apology either, only the hollow acceptance of someone accustomed to being unwanted. Ezra shifted uncomfortably, boots scuffing the plank floor. He had no words to bridge the space between them. Instead, he reached for his coat once more. "Barn needs tending." He stepped back into the night, the cold rushing in to swallow the warmth before the door latched shut. Breath pluming white, he crossed to the barn where the horses waited. Inside, the smell of hay and leather grounded him. He rubbed down his mare, speaking low as if she might absorb his unrest. "Don't get used to her," he muttered. "Ain't gonna last. Just a mouth to feed. Winter's long enough without all that." The horse shifted, ears flicking, untroubled by his words. Ezra leaned his forehead against the animal's neck, eyes closing. For all his gruff certainty, a knot formed in his chest. Pity, perhaps, or something softer he refused to name. Back in the cabin, Clara stood by the hearth. She had set her satchel open, arranging its meager contents on the table. A bundle of dried herbs, a worn Bible with the spine cracked, a small piece of cloth half braided into what looked like the beginning of a cradle lining. She moved slowly, her hand straying once to her belly as though to steady both herself and the child within. The firelight caught the dust that hung in the air, turning it to motes of gold. Clara's eyes lingered on the rocking chair, its seat worn smooth, arms scarred by years of use. It looked like a relic of someone else's life, someone who had once known family, warmth, maybe even laughter. She did not dare sit in it. Instead, she lowered herself onto the bench once more, staring at the blackened kettle above the stove, listening to the wind rattle against the walls. Her lips pressed thin. She felt not welcomed, not even acknowledged, merely placed within, 4 walls to weather out the season. Still, there was shelter, and for that she would endure. Out in the barn, Ezra murmured to himself again, voice low and tired. Winter's gonna be long indeed. The wind howled, carrying both their silences into the night. The days settled into a rhythm of silence. Ezra rose before dawn, pulling on boots stiff with frost, and went to the corrals to break ice from the troughs. Clara remained inside, moving carefully about the kitchen, as though afraid the very walls might resent her presence. Their paths crossed mostly at mealtimes, and even then words were scarce. The first biscuits she baked were near inedible, blackened on the bottom, pale as chalk on top. Ezra chewed one without comment, washing it, down with coffee gone bitter from sitting too long on the stove. Clara had flushed with quiet shame, her hands folding in her lap. He said nothing. He did not scold, did not reassure, only endured. But that evening, she made stew. The broth was thin, but seasoned with something he had not tasted in years. Bay, or thyme drawn from the small pouch of herbs she carried. When he lifted his spoon, he found himself surprised. It was simple fare, yet it carried warmth that spread down to his bones. For the first time since her arrival, Ezra cleared his bowl. Clara noticed, though he gave no word of praise. Nights grew long. Wind scoured the plains, rattling the shutters, and the stove became the heart of the house. Ezra often lingered in the barn until late, preferring the company of horses to the awkward silence of the cabin. When he did return, Clara would already be seated near the lantern, needle in hand, her lap covered with scraps of cloth. She braided them into strips, weaving slowly, her fingers steady despite their thinness. One evening, Ezra paused in the doorway, unseen. The lantern light traced her profile, young, too young for such grief, and the careful concentration with which she bound the cloth. It was no idle craft. She was shaping it into something, a lining for a cradle not yet built, for a child not yet born, in a house that felt little more than a stopgap refuge. Without looking up, she spoke. Her voice was level, almost flat, as if the words had worn themselves down long before being spoken. My husband died last spring. Border skirmish near Laramie. He was in the wrong place, perhaps. Or the right, if you ask his kin. Either way, he was shot. Buried quick. Her fingers did not falter. She pulled the braid tighter, tied a knot, smoothed it across her lap. My people would not have me back. His people had no use for me without him. And so here I am. Ezra leaned against the frame, shadows cloaking him. His throat tightened, but no answer came. The past pressed in on him like a weight. He remembered another grave. Not a husband's, but a brother's. Samuel Callahan, taken by fever 15 years ago. Ezra had dug the earth with his own hands, each shovelful a sentence he never finished. Afterward, the ranch grew quieter, emptier. He had filled the silence with work, years blurring together until loneliness was no longer noticed but simply lived. Clara set down her braid, exhaled once, and returned to her work. No tears fell. Her face bore the composure of someone whose well of weeping had long since run dry. Ezra turned away before she could sense him watching, before he betrayed even a flicker of understanding. He retreated to the barn where the horses shifted in their stalls. Later that night, as he brushed his mare, his voice slipped low, words meant for no ears but the animals. "Don't get used to her. She won't stay." The horse flicked, her ears unbothered. But the words lingered in the rafters, bitter as smoke. Clara, rising for water, passed by the cracked barn door. She heard him, clear enough to know his meaning. She stopped only for a moment, hand tightening against her belly. Her eyes closed, lashes trembling, but she made no sound. She returned to her bench, sat beneath the lantern, and continued braiding cloth in silence. The days dragged on, each marked by the same distance. Ezra labored with cattle and fences, his face chiseled into stone. Clara cooked, cleaned, tended her quiet projects. They circled each other like wary ghosts, both alive, both breathing, yet neither daring to admit the hunger gnawing deeper than food or fire. At night, the house felt less like shelter and more like a truce. The kettle hissed, the wind moaned, and two souls, battered by abandonment, sat beneath the same roof while their grief stood between them like sentinels. For Clara, every silence confirmed what she had already decided. She was tolerated, nothing more. For Ezra, every silence concealed what he could not name, that her presence unsettled him, not because he despised it, but because he feared what might grow from it. The rocking chair remained untouched by both. It stood in its corner, dust clinging to its arms, like a monument to lives half-lived and love long gone. And so the winter deepened, with both of them bound by the same shadows, yet still unable to see the reflection of their own sorrow in the other. The storm came sudden, as storms often did on the high plains. One moment the sky was a pale, brittle blue, and the next it turned heavy, clouds rolling low as if dragging the whole weight of heaven with them. By mid-afternoon, snow was already, slanting sideways, needles of ice riding the wind. The horizon disappeared in a gray wall and the fences groaned under the weight of drift. Ezra shuttered the barn tight, his face stiff from cold, the taste of iron sharp on his tongue. He trudged back toward the cabin, shoulders hunched against the gale. Inside, Clara had stoked the stove high, its iron sides glowing faintly red, though the draft still whistled through every seam of the log walls. She had set coffee to boil, and the smell rose through the room, dark and steady. "Storm'll last the night," Ezra said, stamping snow from his boots. Clara nodded, tugging her shawl closer around her shoulders. She looked out the window, though nothing beyond the glass could be seen but a blur of white. "We are sealed in, then," Ezra grunted. He had known winters that caged men for weeks, the snow deep enough to bury cattle whole. He eyed the larder, thin, but enough for two, barely enough for three. He caught himself in the thought, frowning. Why had his mind gone there? As if in answer, a sound broke against the wind. Hooves. Faint at first, then nearer, until even through the storm they heard the scrape of horseshoes on frozen ground. Ezra stiffened, hand instinctively brushing the rifle that leaned against the wall. Clara rose slowly, her eyes wide. The knock came. Hard, urgent. Ezra moved to the door, every muscle taut. He cracked it open, snow gusting in, and there stood a man astride a lathered horse. The rider's brim was pulled low, his coat crusted white, beard stiff with frost. His eyes, shadowed beneath the hat, fixed on Ezra with the weary desperation of a man near frozen. "Sir," he called over the wind, "begging shelter, just for the night." Ezra's jaw set. Strangers meant risk. Strangers meant the past might catch a man unaware. He started to close the door, but Clara's voice rose, behind him quiet yet firm. No man should be left to freeze. Ezra turned his head. She was standing straight, her hand on the back of the chair, her shawl draped like a banner of resolve. He hesitated, then opened the door wide enough for the man to stumble in. Snow scattered across the floor as the stranger stamped his boots, pulling the hat from his head. Much obliged, the man said, voice smoother now, almost too smooth. He extended his hands toward the stove, sighing as warmth crept back into his bones. Mighty storm you've got out there. Clara fetched a mug, poured coffee, and set it on the table. He thanked her with a smile too quick, eyes lingering, longer than courtesy required. Ezra noticed. Ezra noticed everything. They sat through supper, the storm howling against the cabin. Clara served beans and cornbread, plain fare but hot. The stranger praised it heartily, his charm spilling easy. Haven't had a meal this good since Dodge, he said, raising his tin cup. Clara inclined her head politely, though her eyes remained lowered. Ezra ate in silence, each bite slow, deliberate. He studied the man across the table. His coat was worn but not ragged, boots scuffed yet sturdy. No saddle tramp starved of luck. This one carried himself with the ease of someone used to drifting, used to finding what he wanted in other men's houses. When the plates were cleared, Ezra set his rifle across his knees and sat in the rocker, rocking slow, steady, eyes half-lidded but never asleep. Clara mended cloth by lantern light, though her needle shook faintly. The stranger sprawled near the stove, humming some tune half-remembered, his smile a constant thing, never reaching. His eyes night-deepened. The storm hammered, but inside a quieter storm brewed. It began with questions, casual at first, like idle conversation. "Fine herd you got, Mr. Callahan?" Ezra grunted, offered no answer. The man persisted. "Must take a strong hand to keep it through a winter like this." "How many head? 100? 2? Ezra's eyes narrowed. "Enough." The drifter chuckled, leaned back on his elbow. "And that rifle of yours? Sharps, ain't it? Fine piece. Could fetch a price, even out here." Ezra rocked once, twice. The chair creaked in rhythm with his heartbeat. His hand rested on the barrel. Then the man's gaze slid toward Clara, his smile turning sly. "And your wife. You're a fortunate man." Ezra's voice cut the air, flat and sharp as a blade. "She ain't mine." The room stilled. Clara's needle froze mid-stitch, breath catching. The drifter raised his hands, mockingly placid. "Easy, friend. Just making talk." Ezra said nothing more. His eyes were iron, his silence heavier than words. The stranger smirked but leaned back, feigning ease. Clara bent again to her cloth, though her cheeks burned. By morning, the storm had worsened. Snow pressed against the door, piling high, sealing them in. The air inside grew close, smoke curling from the stove, every creak of the walls loud as a shout. The stranger lingered, unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. Clara felt the weight of it, the storm without, the storm within. Yet beneath her unease, something stirred. When Ezra shifted in his rocker, rifle across his knees, eyes never leaving the drifter, she saw it for the first time. His vigilance was not only for himself, it was for her, for the child she carried. He would never say it, not aloud, not even to himself. But in the silent war of the storm, she recognized the shape of his protection, and it unsettled her more than the danger itself, because it meant she was no longer invisible. The storm did not lift. For 3 days the wind howled against the cabin, driving snow so thick the windows showed nothing but a wall of white. The stranger made himself comfortable, his presence a constant weight. He claimed the storm made travel impossible, that no horse could push through drift so deep. Ezra said nothing, though his silence was heavy with disbelief. The rifle never left his reach. It rested across his knees when he sat in the rocker, leaned against the wall when he worked at the table, propped beside the bedroll he spread by the door each night. The drifter noticed, of course, smiling at it as though amused by Ezra's caution. Clara kept her movements small, her words fewer still. She prepared meals with lowered eyes, set dishes on the table without lifting her face. She spoke to Ezra, only when needed, and even then her voice was a whisper, fragile as glass. Yet within her silence she measured the man, saw the way his gaze lingered too long, the way his questions always circled back to what was not his concern. Evenings stretched long in the dim lantern glow. The stranger filled them with idle talk, his voice easy, slick, winding like a snake in grass. Ezra rarely answered, but one night, after too many hours of silence, the words spilled without his meaning them to. "Cattle raid near Sweetwater," Ezra muttered, his voice low. "Indians hit us hard. Lost 20 head. Lost 3 men. My brother Near didn't make it. He died some years after. Fever. But that night..." His hand brushed unconsciously at the scar along his jaw. "That night made me what I am." Clara, seated with her braid of cloth across her lap, lifted her eyes. It was the most he had ever offered her, and though his face was iron, his voice carried the hollow of old grief. She wanted to ask more, but the words would not come. Instead, her own confession slipped free, soft and trembling. "Sometimes, I wonder if it is cruel, bringing a child into a world that rejects me, that might reject them. Sometimes I pray the Lord makes me strong enough, but most nights I am only afraid." The words hung between them, fragile, dangerous. Ezra's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, steady, unreadable, yet softer than before. The drifter broke the silence with a laugh too sharp. "World don't care if you're afraid, ma'am. World takes what it wants. You either keep it or it's gone." He drank from his cup, smirking as if the lesson belonged to him alone. That night the air in the cabin grew thicker. The stranger lingered near the stove, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Clara stood to clear the plates, but as she passed, he caught her wrist. Not rough, but bold, possessive. "Well now," he drawled, "a man could get used to this kind of keeping." Clara froze, her heart lurching. She tried to pull back, but his grip tightened, his body blocking her path. His smile was easy, but his eyes glinted dark. Before she could speak, Ezra was upon him. The rocker slammed back against the wall as Ezra surged forward, rifle in hand. In one motion, he seized the drifter by the coat and drove him hard against the logs. The rifle barrel pressed beneath the man's jaw, tilting his head back, cutting his laugh short. The cabin filled with a silence more terrible than shouting. Ezra's face was stone, carved with fury he had long buried. His voice came low, dangerous, steady as steel. "You put one hand on her again, and I'll put you in the ground. Don't doubt me." The drifter's smile faltered, though arrogance flickered still in his eyes. "Easy, friend. No harm meant." Clara's hands trembled against her belly. She stepped forward, her voice breaking, pleading, "Ezra, please don't." Her touch, only a brush against his sleeve, was enough. Ezra's chest heaved once, twice, before he pulled the rifle back. He shoved the man away, sending him stumbling against the stove. "At first light, you're gone. Walk if you have to." The drifter straightened his coat, his grin returning, though thinner, edged. "As you say." Ezra stood over him a moment longer, making certain the message had taken root. Then he turned away, set the rifle across the table, and lowered himself slowly back into the rocker. The chair creaked under his weight. He did not look at Clara, though his hands shook faintly as he steadied the rifle. Clara stood frozen, her breath ragged. She had seen fury before, men drunk, men cruel, but never fury chained with such restraint. For the first time since her arrival, she felt truly shielded, protected not by walls or by chance, but by a man who had chosen to stand between her and danger. Her heart thudded, not with fear of Ezra, but with something stranger, something she dared not name. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The plains lay smothered in white, glittering beneath a brittle sun. Clara peered from the window. "He's gone," she whispered. Ezra nodded once, though his eyes remained hard. He stepped out into the snow, following the tracks that cut away from the cabin. They led not toward the road, but toward the barn. Inside, he found the stall empty, a saddle missing, tack stolen. The drifter had left, but not empty-handed. Ezra stood long in the barn, breath clouding, anger simmering deep. This was not finished. The storm had only been the beginning. He closed his eyes, hand brushing the mare's flank. "He'll be back," he muttered. "I know his kind." Back. In the cabin, Clara fed the fire, her shawl wrapped tight. She glanced at Ezra as he returned, snow clinging to his coat, eyes dark with the weight of what was yet to come. She said nothing, but her heart carried the truth. Something had shifted. Danger had sharpened what silence could not, and though the storm outside had broken, a different storm waited on the horizon. The drifter's absence left the cabin quieter than before, though not empty. The air still held the echo of his presence, like smoke that lingered after a fire. Ezra kept the rifle close, often scanning the horizon when he worked the corrals. But the danger did not return, not yet. Inside, a fragile peace took root. Clara moved about the kitchen with greater steadiness now, humming softly at times when she thought herself unheard. Her belly had grown heavy, each step slower, but she worked with a patience that seemed born of necessity. Ezra often found himself pausing in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her stir a pot or lay a loaf to rise. He told himself it was vigilance, that he was merely making certain she managed. But in truth he lingered because the sound of her humming eased something in. Him he had not known was sore. The days shortened. Snow tapped against the shutters most evenings, the plains locked deep in winter's grip. One such night Clara sat by the fire, shawl wrapped about her shoulders, needle in hand. The cradle liner she had been braiding for weeks now draped across, her lap in near completion. She worked in rhythm with the crackling fire, the quiet hum of her voice filling the spaces between shadows. Ezra settled into the rocker across from her, the rifle set aside for once. He watched the way the lamplight touched her hair, how her fingers, though calloused, moved with care. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Clara broke the silence, her words slow, as if drawn from a place she had long guarded. "My wedding dress," she began, eyes still on the cloth, "was simple. White muslin stitched by my own hands. The hem caught on a barn nail the morning of the wedding, tore the edge near through. I laughed then, laughed so hard I near cried. Thought it a sign the day would be full of mishap." Her smile, faint and fleeting, touched her lips but not her eyes. "It was a good day, though, a day with laughter in it. I have not laughed that way since." Ezra's throat tightened. He shifted in the rocker, the wood creaking. His gaze fell to the fire, sparks rising like fragments of memory. At length, his voice came, rough with disuse. "Can't recall the last time I laughed either." Clara looked at him then, truly, looked as though the admission were more than words. It was a window into a part of him no one else had seen. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, a quiet shared between them like the warmth of the fire. Ezra rose after a time, poured coffee from the pot and brought 2 mugs to the hearth. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing in the exchange. His hand was rough, scarred, marked by years of labor and violence. Hers trembled faintly, yet she did not pull away. The brief contact lingered longer than it should have, neither of them moving to end it. She accepted the cup, her eyes lowered, though a faint warmth colored her cheeks. Ezra settled back into the rocker, sipping his own. The bitterness of the coffee, the soft crackle of firewood, the snow ticking at the shutters, it all wove together into something almost gentle. They sat that way a long while, the silence between them no longer a gulf, but a bridge. Clara's breathing steadied, her hands resting against her belly as though to shield the child within from the world outside. Ezra's eyes drifted often toward her, then away, afraid of what he might reveal. If he lingered too long, within him a struggle churned. He feared the hope that crept unbidden into his chest, the thought that perhaps she might remain, that perhaps the house need not return to silence come spring. But hope was dangerous. He had built his life on the refusal of it, brick by brick, after burying too many things he loved. He feared that if she left, as he had once muttered to the horses she surely overheard, it would break him in ways he could not mend. Clara, for her part, sensed his retreat. She saw it in the way his eyes fled hers, in the stiffness of his shoulders when quiet stretched too long. Yet she did not press him, did not speak words to force what could not be forced. She offered only her presence, steady and patient, her shawl spread across her lap like a banner of endurance. The fire burned low, shadows deepening. Ezra's hand brushed hers once more as he reached for her empty cup. This time she did not lower her gaze. Their eyes met, steady, unflinching, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them, unspoken, uncertain, but real. When he turned away, the knot in his chest pulled tight. But for the first time in years, the knot was not made of grief alone. It was made of something perilous, something fragile, something he dared not name. The storm outside pressed on, relentless, but within the cabin, another fire smoldered, quiet, hesitant and luminous as the first light before dawn. The storm broke at last, leaving the Wyoming plains glazed in white and still as glass. For days the land lay hushed beneath the snow, each breath of wind lifting crystals like smoke. Ezra worked to mend fences half buried in drifts, though, his eyes turned often to the horizon. Something in his bones warned him the quiet would not last. He was right. At dusk one evening, as the sky bruised purple and gray, riders appeared on the ridge. 3 of them, dark against the pallid snow. Ezra's jaw tightened. He recognized the drifter by the slant of his hat, the same hungry posture. Now he had brought companions, men as lean and ragged as wolves. Ezra's hand found the rifle before, thought caught up. "Clara," he said low, without looking at her. She stood in the doorway, shawl pulled tight around her, eyes wide with knowing. "Up to the loft, don't argue." She obeyed, though her steps trembled. The ladder creaked beneath her weight, and once aloft she pressed her back to the timbers, one hand at her belly as if to shield the child from the world's cruelty. The riders came bold to the yard, hooves cutting dark into the snow. The drifter swung down first, grinning with the confidence of a man who had returned to claim what he believed was his due. "Evenin', Callahan," he called, voice sharp in the frozen air. "We'll be taking a share of your stock. Winter's long and you've more than you need." Ezra stepped forward, rifle leveled, his breath misting white. "You'll turn your horses and ride back the way you came, empty-handed." The men laughed, a harsh, hungry sound. One shifted in his saddle, the other loosened his holster. The drifter's smile thinned. "You're outnumbered, old man. Don't be foolish. Try me," Ezra said. The standoff cracked like ice. Pistol flashed. The first shot split the stillness. Ezra's rifle roared in reply, the recoil jolting his shoulder. One rider toppled from the saddle, snow swallowing him. The yard filled with smoke and thunder. Horses screamed, hooves struck sparks. Ezra moved with the steadiness of long practice, each shot measured, his body braced against the fence. But he was only one man, and their numbers pressed. A bullet grazed his side, hot pain tearing through cloth and skin. He staggered, blood blooming crimson on the snow. From the loft, Clara bit her fist to keep from crying out. Her heart hammered wild, the child within her shifting with every tremor. She wanted to remain hidden, to trust Ezra's strength, but when one intruder broke past, wrenching open the cabin door to steal provisions, instinct overcame fear. She seized the nearest thing at hand, the cast-iron pan from the stove. When the man turned, eyes wide at the sight of her, she swung with all the strength terror could lend. The blow landed sharp against his skull. He crumpled without a sound. Ezra, half dazed by pain, heard the crash and turned in time to see Clara, framed in the doorway, pan still clutched, chest heaving. For an instant, the world seemed still, the snow falling soft around her, the firelight flickering at her back, her shawl slipping from her shoulders like wings. The drifter, seeing his men falter, spat a curse and fired again. Ezra's rifle answered true and final. The man jerked, stumbled, and fell hard into the snow. Silence spread, broken only by the ragged breaths of the living. Ezra sank against the fence, blood dripping warm against the cold. Clara dropped the pan and hurried to him, shawl torn free to press against his wound. Her hands trembled, tears streaking her cheeks. "You can't leave me," she whispered fiercely, as though the words alone could tether him. Do you hear? You cannot leave me. Not now. For the first time in years, Ezra let another's hands hold him. He did not. Protest did not push her away. The weight of her touch, the urgency in her voice pierced deeper than pain. He closed his eyes and for once, leaned. Weeks passed. The men who came to steal lay buried beyond the ridge, the earth frozen over them. The scar on Ezra's side knitted, slowly, a mark among many, though this one bound him not to grief but to the living. Clara's time came with the thaw of February, the wind sharp, yet carrying hints of change. Within the small cabin, beneath the rafters that had borne witness to storm and strife, her cries rose and then softened. At last, silence broke with the wail of new life. Ezra, weary yet unshaken, took the child in his arms. The tiny weight seemed impossibly light yet heavier than all he had carried. He sat in the rocker by the fire, moving slowly, careful not to wake the infant. The flames painted his scarred face in amber, softened the lines time had carved. Clara lay upon the bed, exhausted, radiant with a peace she had not thought to know again. Her eyes lingered on him, on the man who had hired her for her cooking, who had nearly sent her back into the cold, who now rocked her child as though it were his own blood. Ezra looked down at the infant, at the fist no larger than his thumb, at the soft breath warm against his chest. A strange fullness swelled within him, fragile and fierce all at once. He had thought himself a man emptied of laughter, of tenderness, of belonging. Yet here, in the quiet glow of firelight, with Clara's gaze steady upon him and the child's breath against his skin, he felt something greater than survival. He felt grace, unearned, unexpected, given freely. Outside, snow melted in rivulets along the fence posts. The land would green again, as it always did. But inside, in the cabin that had once echoed only with silence, there was warmth, and the sound of life and the steady creak of a rocking chair. Ezra Callahan, scarred and weathered, had been given a second chance, and he did not take it lightly.